Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the first webinar in our customer engagement series, Strengthening the Customer Relationship Through Innovation. We're really excited to talk to you today about the effects innovation has on your organization and your customers. My name is Hank Summey, and I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at LiquidHub. I have 20 years experience in designing and implementing innovative engagement solutions for clients across all industries. And joining me today is my colleague, Will DuPont. Will, would you like to give us a brief introduction?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name's Will DuPont, and I've been involved in digital innovation since I started a digital agency in Atlanta in 1994, and have been working with companies large and small since that time, helping them determine the best way to leverage opportunities presented by new technology.
Thanks, Will. A few minor logistical points before we dive into the presentation. Please feel free to submit your questions throughout the webinar using the chat feature in the webinar dialog box there, and we'll end the session with answering those questions. We'll also send out a recording of the webinar via email tomorrow. And certainly if you have any remaining questions after that, or by going back and looking through the recording, please email us at engage@liquidhub.com. Fantastic. All right, so let's dive in. Today we're going to focus on innovation, and the way that we think about innovation is around engaging people. And when we talk about people, we use the word people specifically because in your industry context, the types of people that you want to engage with are going to change. If you're a healthcare plan provider, you're going to talk about engaging members. If you're a physician, you're going to talk about engaging patients. So throughout the presentation today, we'll refer to engaging people. And certainly, we're going to talk about different strategies and techniques in how we go about engaging the people that matter the most to you in that specific engagement. The way that we think about engaging people is through understanding their expectations. And this slide represents 4 central or core pillars in the way that we think about getting at those expectations. Certainly, personalization is a huge area of focus, and by the way, I'll give a little nod to the next webinar in our series, which will focus on the importance of personalization in the customer experience. But the experience, if you're truly going to create engaging experiences, has to recognize and understand who the person is that you're engaging at that point in time. It's incredibly frustrating, as you all know, if you have to keep keying in customer codes or policy numbers and things like that. It's just not an experience that folks will come back to. And of course, technologically, systems have to be available now, and systems and the platforms that these engagement experiences run on have to be highly available and perform and be incredibly available when the person wants to engage at that point in time. And it's got to be easy. And easy sometimes doesn't mean that it's the most beautiful experience. It could be that you need to have an experience that has much larger buttons, much different types of aesthetics, but we need to understand what easy really is. And at the end of the day, the experience has to deliver value. We also want to focus on a transformational journey and understand at what point we're engaging people in that transformational journey, and what point we are in understanding the implementation of that experience. So, for instance, you might be working on a design phase of a specific transformation journey, and you'll need to understand the outputs from an engagement phase and understanding the platforms that you've designed and developed to engage the people that matter most to you before you can get into the design. And what this chart represents is a way for you to think about the inputs and outputs necessary at each phase and stage along that transformational journey. So a little bit of background and setup around how we think about innovation and how it is completely involved in engaging people and the people that matter the most to you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Will to talk about the actual innovation process that we follow. Thanks, Will.
Thank you, Hank. So I think a good way to kind of start, when we use the word innovation, what does that really mean? Because we've found that much like the word strategy, the word can be overused, it's undefined or ill-defined. So we've developed, or we utilize, a framework to help our clients kind of categorize what innovation can mean to them as a company that provides a good or service. We think that, and we spend a lot of time focused on incremental innovation. There is transformational innovation, which we're all familiar with, and I'll provide a couple of examples as a case in point. But we feel incremental innovation can be critically important in a company's success in allowing them to do their core, provide their core service in a more efficient, more effective, faster, or less costly manner. And we kind of classify that as D1, or defensive innovation. Kind of the next layer out, which is focused on driving innovation to differentiate, is generally going to require more investment in time and energy and money, more internal resources. It is absolutely critical, but those are generally going to be very large-scale efforts. And we found that some clients have a hard time making progress in innovation because they're trying to start in the D2 category or even the D3 category, versus using different approaches to engaging with internal stakeholders, driving idea generation through design thinking with a more modest but still important target in mind. And then, of course, there is disruptive innovation that completely changes how somebody consumes a good or a service. And again, we'll talk about that a bit. So, I'm sorry, do I have the... I am attempting to change the slide. Okay, there we go. So innovation can impact companies in a number of different areas. Obviously, one way is to help generate new products. You can look to improve existing services. And again, that's taking what you're currently doing now and using innovation to do it in a better, faster, perhaps a more profitable way for the company or less costly way for the consumer. You can utilize innovation to generate net new offerings that are in adjacent businesses or markets. You can also then take combinations of products and services and offerings to create entirely new value chains. And then you can create completely new ways for consumers to buy or engage with your services. Okay. So when you look at how to think about and approach innovation, we feel you really have to balance three primary areas. We always start with the end user. For us, if you don't put the user at the center of the innovation process, then you're going to create something that's not going to drive the deepening of the relationship with the customer that should be the aspiration of all companies and what they're executing. Obviously, that has to be mapped against business goals. There are user wants or needs that theoretically could be developed and provided, but if they don't support the business goals, that in many cases can probably be boiled down to improved margin, reduced costs, improved efficiency, then that's probably not a worthwhile effort. And ultimately, you have to have technology that is helping to enable these. That you have to make sure that what you're creating and what you're driving to provide can be enabled by the technology that you have and can implement in a relatively cost-effective way. Okay, so we've got some examples of digital disruption that people are going to be familiar with, but I think they provide, an interesting way to think about what innovation can do in how consumers and buyers engage with companies. So in the past, if you wanted music or you wanted news, you would carry a small handheld radio. It was probably AM only, so very low fidelity, and hopefully something that was on the handful of radio stations that were available was providing something that you were interested in. Now we have very powerful handheld computers that we carry around in our pockets that are connected to a network at all times, and you now have effectively limitless choice in what you listen to, limitless control in how you consume it. Obviously, the cost models have changed drastically. It's a completely different process, and obviously that's resulted in huge disruption in the music industry. But it has now set an expectation for how people expect to be able to access and consume content, and as very often is the case, it starts in a very consumer-oriented environment, and it bleeds over into the expectations that people have and how they engage with or consume any good or service. So you can use music as an example, but that bleeds over to how you engage with your healthcare provider. Access to information, is it timely? Is it accurate? Is it up to date? Are you able to get it when and where you want it? I think that's a good example of how once expectations are set, they tend to be extended to and applied to all interactions of all types. Next slide, please. And if you look at music specifically, obviously we've seen, at least for some of the older people like myself on the phone, we've gone from vinyl. You had 8-track cassettes, which is how, if you wanted to listen to specific music in the car, you needed to have an 8-track. Then we've gone to regular cassettes, to fully digitized, to an iPod, and now you have Spotify, which again provides you a limitless access to different types of things, but it's also fundamentally changed your relationship with music in that in the past, very often, if you wanted to be introduced to new music, that would come from a friend, somebody that you knew had similar taste. They would tell you they just bought this album. It's fantastic. You have to go buy it. Then you had to go buy it, bring it in, listen to it. Now you don't even have to directly engage with somebody. You can see what they're listening to. You can see what's on a playlist that they've created, and you're able to take that information, immediately consume it, and have access to new music. So it's, again, really driving user choice and user control over how and when they consume content and what the influences are that drive that. If we look at a medical example, those with diabetes used to be far more limited potentially in what they could do, how they monitored their condition, how they addressed their condition, and now you can carry a portable pump. It automatically monitors where you are and can apply exactly what you need in any given circumstance to maintain the appropriate levels and keep you, fully functioning and engaged and doing the activities that you would like to be doing at any given time. And you think about innovation in medicine in general and what is happening there, and we're still very, very early in the transformation of that industry and the impact that it's going to have on the day-to-day lives of people. Next slide, please. I think Coca-Cola has been a client of ours over the years, and I think the freestyle machine that they developed is a very, very interesting example of consumer choice. Obviously, this is a business that has a number of challenges and headwinds. How they engage with customers. I mean, they've been selling, not to understate it, but they've been selling, flavored sugar water in one form or another for well over 100 years. But I think many of us might remember as children going to the fountain and I'm going to put a little Fanta in there, I'm going to put a little root beer, and they through research determined that that was actually a very fond childhood memory for a number of people. And again, if we go back to some themes that we've been touching on, which is user choice and user control, they actually created a machine that allows you in a very organized way to mix and match a number of different flavors, give you complete and total control over what it is that you're consuming. And that's been a huge success for the brand and how people are engaging with, again, a company that's been selling effectively the same product for many, many years. I think this is another great example of creating control for the end user. We're all very familiar with the traditional key and lock, and I would guess there isn't a single person on this call who at some point has not lost a set of keys and been unable to get in their house, access what they needed to access. And now with the quick set system, you can unlock something via phone. Again, creating choice and control. You can provide a temporary key to somebody, a service provider, or somebody who needs to get in your home and who you trust to go in there without your oversight. You can provide them a temporary key, exactly when they went into the house, when they left the house. And it's another great example of technology creating greater choice and also greater security, because you're not going to, in all likelihood, lose the access code that allows you to do this. It's in fact much more secure than a physical set of keys alone. And I think most people are familiar with the Nest at this point, the ability to monitor what's happening in your house, to impact it when you're leaving, either via a timed system, or to know that you'll be returning. You're going to be getting home a few hours early, so instead of bringing the temperature down at starting at 5 o'clock, because you typically get home at 6, if you're coming home early, you're going to have that happen a bit earlier. You can have the system coordinate with itself within the house, and it's really changing how we engage with our homes. Again, I think in a few years we're going to look at this as a very early and very rudimentary example of the connected home and how technology is impacting the physical spaces that we live and work in. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit now about the framework that we use to approach innovation. I think an important point to make here is the fact that, again, many companies may start an innovation program internally that is often seen by other parts of the organization as kind of a sandbox where people are given access to technology and they play a lot and they do some interesting things, and the output of that is rarely applied back to and it rarely impacts the actual operations of our clients. And we've heard that from many, many clients over the years. So part of what we're trying to do is take an incremental approach, not boil the ocean, if you will, and try and solve huge issues from the start, but identify very specific opportunities where we can utilize technology to drive incremental innovation. And in some cases, we're working with our clients to generate a set of those ideas and then utilize a framework to evaluate which ones make the most sense to pursue. Or in other cases, they may have a set of ideas that have, for one reason or another, been generated internally, been placed into a parking lot, and the organization has not had the time or the resources, or has not known the best approach to take those ideas and make them real enough to evaluate and determine whether they should be turned into a full-scale investment exercise. So we engage with our clients in anything as short as a half a day idea generation session. We may run a couple of day sessions where we have very specific agendas, very specific activities, and are looking to drive specific outputs that kind of feed the next phase of the discussion. We've also found that including people from across the client organization is critical to actually driving any sort of meaningful change. I think many people have been exposed to a situation where an interesting idea was generated. Large organizations by nature tend to be resistant of change, and for various reasons, those ideas have not been able to gain traction. We feel very strongly that when we're engaging with our clients around innovation, we want to pull stakeholders from across the organization. One, because we feel that there are pockets of knowledge that can exist in an isolated way. It might be because of where somebody is within the organization, what their function is within the organization, and we definitely believe that innovation can come from many, many places, and often they may come from people or from groups where the idea is not their primary focus. We've had developers come up with fantastic ideas around marketing and customer engagement. So as an example, we think that having people from across the organization to be active and engaged participants in the process, to help uncover ideas that exist, and then actually to have those people serve as ambassadors to the idea as we then turn them to what might be a clickable prototype. It's going to be some sort of physical manifestation of the concept to then better communicate what it is and what the value is across the organization, and then also obviously potentially to put it back in front of end users for testing and to constantly refine and improve and optimize what the idea is, because it's another challenge that many companies face. Nobody gets it right the first time. You don't need to get it right the first time. The changes in technology allow very affordable, incremental development of prototypes, so that you're constantly putting not just ideas, not just storyboards, but putting something in front of end users that actually does a good job of representing what that experience really would be like. And again, have the end user play a large role in driving what a final or at least a launchable solution is. We do run full-scale 12-week programs where we go from an initial idea to the creation and manifestation of that idea, put it back for testing and sharing within the client company, and then taking the learnings from that. And sometimes it might be a decision, you know what, that was a good idea, but we're not quite ready for it, or the end user isn't ready for it. Perhaps it doesn't fit the brand. But very often, yes, we feel, we now understand what this is. We've gotten feedback from users that this is, in fact, something that they would find useful. Let's actually turn this into a program and either launch a pilot or go ahead and roll that into our current production environment. So if we go to the next slide, this is really how we think everybody needs to think about innovation. It is something that is very fluid. It is not rigid. It is not waterfall in approach. And we think that the most innovative companies take an approach where you work to generate ideas. And we do believe in design thinking. We do believe in kind of the unfettered exercise of generating an initial set of ideas. And people have a tendency to first come up with reasons why something won't work. We feel very strongly, no, let's get, every idea is a good idea. Let's get them out. Let's talk about them a little bit to make sure that everybody has the same understanding. But then you do need to create a framework to evaluate the appropriateness of that idea. And that's going to be against our understanding of the user goals. Again, the business goals are a critical part of that discussion, obviously. We do feel, I say obviously, we do feel a lot of companies have innovation efforts that are not tied strongly enough, early enough, back to the business goals that the company has to make sure that that is going to be a viable, if it in fact is proven out through testing, that that is a viable idea and fits the brands and the strategic goals of the company. But utilize that framework to evaluate which idea or which handful of ideas are worthy of additional investment. And then you want to create that idea, you want to instantiate it in a way that makes it real enough. And depending on the idea or the concept, that could be a very detailed flow through a 8 or 10 screen experience, or you may just need a screen or two to appropriately convey what it is and how consumers would engage with that. And you then take that and you use that to learn from, right? You put that in front of end users. Very often our clients are using that output, again, to socialize within their organization to make sure that people understand what it is early and, again, can have some sense of shared ownership. We have found without shared ownership of ideas, often no matter how good the idea is, without shared ownership and without senior client sponsorship, it's very difficult to turn those into something that is going to have a meaningful impact on the organization. And then as you go through that process, you may have found the exact right idea, you may have proven it out through testing, and then you launch it, and hopefully you create some incremental impact or occasionally some disruptive impact. But you should be constantly taking the outputs and the learnings from each of these phases and having them have an impact on how you're engaging in the think or the make or the learn process. And we feel very strongly that this is not something that you do once. You don't have an innovation effort and generate some ideas, and you can do that, but this really should be an ongoing process that you use as an organization to be a steady source of ideas and to prove those ideas out and to have some validation before you make significant investment in them, and that this is a great way to provide ongoing impact into how you're digitally engaging with people. So we're going to provide a couple of success stories or case studies. These are clients that we work with, so this is work that we've done, but we think they illustrate a lot about user choice, user control, and how you can actually engage with clients and really in some cases impact their core business model. So with that in mind, if we go to the next slide, Edward Andrews Holmes is a client that we've been working with for a few years. They are a custom home builder based here in Atlanta. They received a large investment from a private equity firm, and with that came the expectation that they were going to scale in a way that they had not traditionally in the past. And they were really challenged to think about their business and think about how they could more effectively engage with the people that are buying their houses. So we were initially hired to redo their website, and that led to a discussion that we drove of their core business process and how they were taking their buyers through from the time that they decided on a lot and went under contract to the point where they were able to actually move into their home and close out the transaction. And we found a few inefficiencies that were definitely areas of opportunity where the process was really being driven by their own supply chain and the lag time that it took to acquire certain elements of the house, like cabinetry. Takes a very long time. So they were very often pushing to have their customers make a decision on that prior to having made some decisions around overall design theme for the house. We also found that the language of design represented a real challenge for their customers and for their internal design team who are charged with working with those customers. What it's a little bit like talking about what does strategy mean, what does innovation mean? Well, when you're talking with somebody about a custom home and they come in and they sit down and say, we like traditional, or we like, our taste is very modern. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean a lot, and we found through talking to their customers and running some sessions that very often, and is typically married couples that are buying these houses, that typically the couple was not speaking with the same language, and one person's definition of traditional or modern was not at all aligned with their spouse's definition of that, which then also created an issue when the designer would try and work to make recommendations. They were having a challenge. So amongst the things that we did for Edward Andrews is we developed a tool that customers use before coming into the design center that would allow them to go through a series of choices concerning what look or style or color palette they liked. And they would do this together as a couple. And after answering about 40 questions, we actually had a lot of insight, or have a lot of insight, into what their focus was around design and what they actually meant, which then allowed the internal designer to get to recommendations much sooner. And this resulted in shortening up, in a highly measurable way, the process from the agreement to purchase a lot to the completion of the design process. Time is money in many cases, but when you're carrying land, it's definitely a big impact. If we go to the next slide, we've actually been able to measure exactly how much time and money has been saved by making that process more efficient. We get to the right answers faster. There are fewer change orders once somebody has seen the results of their decisions within their home, and it has a very, very meaningful impact on our client. I think another interesting aspect of this, we've all heard about the blending of digital and physical. In this case, we worked with our client to actually design the physical space, the design center, and to optimize which digital tools were being utilized and in which settings to facilitate not just an effective experience within the design center, but something that's very pleasurable for the buyer. If you've ever been in a similar kind of facility with a number of Edward Andrews competitors, it's a dusty kind of warehouse feel. You're pulling blocks out of closets and quickly cleaning them off. We've almost entirely eliminated that, and people go through the process not only feeling good about their decisions and the home that they've ended up spending quite a bit of money for, but feeling really good about the process itself and taking something that is challenging and often very stressful and making it a much more pleasant experience for them. So I think this is an example where understanding the end user and being innovative in how you work to solve the opportunities that you've defined through understanding how the user would like to work and what they're looking to accomplish can have a huge, huge impact on the experience, on the brand, on customer satisfaction, and in this case, a huge impact on the bottom line for our client. So this is some work that we've done for a large national grocer. Most people would probably agree with the statement that grocery shopping is the most disliked regular chore that people need to engage in. We did actually do quite a lot of research on this. We like to do kind of experience-driven research where we're not just asking questions, getting answered, and tallying the answers up to form a point of view. In this case, we did quite a lot of shop-alongs with customers in store to kind of understand what the shopping experience was like for them and where the opportunities were to help improve that and to make it more pleasant. For most people, the short answer to that, first and foremost, is get me in and out of the store faster with everything that I need. Secondarily, if you can serve me some relevant coupons for things that I'm purchasing, that is helpful. And then there definitely is an ongoing opportunity to help enhance the process by which people select what they're going to eat and prepare it. But first and foremost, how do you get me in and out faster so that I can spend more time with my family and do the other things that I need to do? So if we go to the next slide, we actually worked with this customer to develop a list as path through the store so that as you compile your shopping list within the app that they have, it will actually organize it by the floor plan of your specific store. So it is laid out. It can tell you exactly where each item is within the store, and you're able to get in and get out in a much faster, more effective way. As part of that, if you're interested in learning new recipes, if you have never cooked an artichoke before and have had no idea what you're supposed to do with those things, that is a different way to engage and actually add value. And we found through taking that research and helping the client prioritize where the greatest opportunity was, that's had a meaningful impact, and their daily digital engagement via the mobile app is in the millions per day. It's an incredibly high number. Orkin Pest Control is a client that we've worked with over a number of years, and I think it's an interesting example for a couple of reasons. One, it's a very old company. It's a very traditional company. Pest control has been delivered basically in the same way for many, many, many years. This is also a company that we initially started our efforts redesigning their website, and have worked with them over time to think about how beyond having a very effective and impactful website, how can you utilize technology to help support your brand position, which is as the premium brand in the marketplace. What are the steps that you can take to support that position, to reduce churn and improve your overall customer experience? So we run an ongoing innovation program, annual innovation program for them that includes multiple off-sites where we pull people from across the organization, and we typically have somebody from the very senior executive team and have multiple people that are service providers in the field that drive trucks and deliver the service. Again, we feel it's important that good ideas can come from anywhere within an organization, and you need those representatives in the room to understand the potential impact, but also understand how to talk about the ideas you generate so that they will be accepted and ultimately embraced by the organization. Because again, regardless of how good the idea is, if it's a large organization, diverse organization, if the organization doesn't institutionalize those and embrace them, that will be a wasted opportunity. So we feel very strongly about getting that degree of engagement. But one of the ideas that we came up with during an innovation session last year was the challenge that in many cases, Orkin is coming to your home, they're delivering their service, and best case scenario is you have no bugs. So it's the absence of a problem is an indicator of their success. You're paying for this on an ongoing basis. So they challenged the teams and us to help develop some ways to prove out the service, because we do feel we do a better job, we are more complete, we have more highly trained technicians, we have entomologists on staff, and that those are in fact real differentiators. But how do we show that when very often our customers aren't even home when we come to deliver the service. So we came up with the concept of live feed, where the service technicians are wearing a camera. This is for presentation only. We would not have this mini version of the Hubble telescope attached to somebody's helmet, but it did help communicate the concept, where they record the session. You're able to see, one, hey, they actually were complete. They did go, throughout my house, inside and outside. They did identify an area that I need to follow up on, and they really were thorough and complete. So we record it. It's then posted to a site. You get an email, and we think, in many cases, the customer may view this once. We will have those customers that want to see this every single time. Some people will view it once, and even if they do that, it will help confirm that, yes, this is a good use of my funds. This is a complete service, and I feel good about what they're providing to us. It helps improve communication, and we think ultimately can have a meaningful impact on reducing customer churn. Another, and this is one of our favorite examples. The client identified for us a specific challenge that they had, that when they were putting out what we refer to as critter traps, those are put out on the customer site. The service technician then leaves, and they have no way of knowing whether something is in that trap, what it is, and if it needs to be addressed, without physically driving to the location and looking at it. And as you might imagine, there's a lot of cost involved in that, time, particularly if the trap has not been sprung. So we went and, using, I believe it was $130 worth of materials, constructed a prototype to demonstrate how that problem could be solved. So we used Raspberry Pi, other off-the-shelf technology. We constructed this trap so that when the trap is sprung, it automatically takes a photograph of what is in the trap and then sends via text message or email, depending on whatever you choose, to whatever numbers you want it to go to. And that could just go to the technician. It could go to the technician and the homeowner. But they know in real time, either it was a false alert because there's nothing in there, I do need to go and reset it, but I don't need to do it immediately, or there's a raccoon, there's a possum, there's a squirrel, it's in there, we need to have somebody go and take care of this right now. And they've now taken this concept and created a slightly more elegant looking version of it than what we have here, and that's actually in test in a couple of different markets. So if we look at a couple of key takeaways from the discussion today, I think it's really important to understand that innovation can and should be incremental. That is certainly not the only kind of innovation, but we found that a number of clients are intimidated by the concept of innovation. The fear of failure is high. A number of our clients have had internal programs where, again, those are the people that get all the toys. There's not necessarily a tremendous amount of accountability. And we feel that the way you get an organization thinking differently, engaging internally in a different way, feeling free to, there is no bad idea. There are only ideas that can then be evaluated later. That's a fundamental shift, getting people comfortable contributing outside of their core area of expertise. We've found that's also a great source of ideas, and really most people are not oriented that way. Most large organizations are not oriented that way, and the way to do it is to not put the pressure on yourself to be transformational in your innovation efforts, but to really think about it as having incremental approach. That can even be something very small, but if it is not something that you would have arrived at in your normal day-to-day way of engaging, then that still to us represents innovation. We feel it's very, very important to put your customer or user or stakeholder or employee, if you're talking about internal engagement, at the center of innovation. You need to understand who they are, what they're trying to accomplish, but also in many cases, what is their emotional state when they're trying to accomplish that. That's very relevant for our Orkin client because people tend to be very emotional if they see a rat or they see a cockroach or they have a large raccoon trapped in their cellar. So what are their motives? What's their emotional state? And how do you design something that is going to most effectively address their needs at that time in moment? To do that, you really have to understand who they are and what their motivations are. And then utilize, it's great now we can do so much utilizing technology now. Really look at minimally viable products, look at low fidelity prototypes, look at something tangible that represents the idea and the concept, and test against that, generate ideas against that, use that to get internal support and buy-in, and then look to build the fidelity incrementally over time. I think with that, Hank, I'll turn it back to you.
That's great, Will. Thanks so much for taking us through that. You're not off the hook yet, though. I got a couple of really good questions, so hang in there with us a bit here. And let me throw the first one out there, and it kind of ties into your last bullet that you had on the previous screen. How do you know when you're done? How do you know when you can release the product? And you talked about low fidelity and increasing fidelity of prototypes and the minimal viable product, but when's it ready to go out and start, getting people engaged around it and getting feedback?
Well, I think that what people have found is to be less concerned about and to be unafraid in putting things in front of your users. So you can do that in a very controlled way. You can have a functioning prototype. You can bring some of your target audience into a room, and you can have them engage with that, and you can gauge what their reaction is. But we've found an increasing willingness for our clients to launch larger scale pilot programs where they're actually putting it out into the marketplace in a controlled way. Obviously, if you have a high volume website as a core to your experience, it's relatively easy to do A/B testing, to siphon off a small percentage and send them into that experience. But we've also found that customers are more willing to engage in that way as well. And ultimately, you get the best findings from having a fairly large group of people engage with the idea or the concept that you're trying to develop. As far as being complete, I think if you reflect back on the slide that shows how the idea generation feeds into what you make, which then feeds into what you test, the learnings from that should impact the next round of idea generation. You're never really complete. There's always the opportunity for improvement, for optimization, and we think that that's how our clients need to think about innovation and need to think in total about how they engage with their customers. New technologies will come. What is the role of augmented reality in how somebody goes about shopping for or buying an automobile, for example? We know the pace of change is continuing to accelerate. That is an absolute, and that is going to continue indefinitely into the future. So it means willing to be flexible and knowing that, in fact, you're never done. There is no such thing as done.
That's great. Ready for another one?
Sure.
So, you talked about there's no such thing as a bad idea. It's just, how relevant is it to the people that you're trying to engage. How do you measure and justify the cost of innovation and, kind of design thinking when you may realize that you put something out there, in a low fidelity version or, mid-level fidelity, and it's just not performing the way that you thought? How do you go about thinking about, the cost associated with going through the kind of workshops or the salon, activities that you highlighted in terms of the approach?
Well, we think to some degree clients need to be willing to invest in innovation, understanding that there will be ideas that are generated, and some of those ideas may look viable on the face of it and turn out not to be. And that to us is just cost of doing business. We do believe very strongly, though, that you should be applying a framework which can vary somewhat depending on the industry and what we're looking to accomplish. But you do want to be thinking about potential financial impact, what's the market size, what is the financial impact if in fact this is something that people engage with. And you should be able to have some idea. It might not be exactly correct, but you should be able to model out what the potential opportunity is. Conversely, if you are scrappy in your approach and utilize things like lower fidelity models and do the right kind of testing, you should be able to determine earlier than you were able to in the past, and ultimately at a lower sunk cost than would have required in the past, to determine whether this is a viable idea or not. And we feel that the financial modeling is an important part of it, but you can now create prototypes that are of a certain fidelity that would have taken much more time and cost much more money even 3, 4, 5 years ago. So we think some of the tools we're able to utilize for our clients can reduce that initial sunk cost rather significantly.
Got it. One more for you here. Talk to us a little bit about how people typically engage you in the process. Do they help? I mean, do they use a retainer with you and sign you up for so many of these kind of workshops or sessions, or is it per idea or per product, if you will?
Yeah, and not surprisingly, we're very flexible in how we engage. For example, if I look to one of our client examples, we initially just did a bit of a kind of a one-off, one-time exercise. The client found it of value, and now we run and drive an annual innovation process. For some clients, they may have a specific need that they want to explore, and they need to do it very quickly, and it might be a single month where we're very quickly, if the degree to which we can do meaningful research, customer research in a month is limited, but we may spend a day or two with some customers, make sure we understand what their requirements are as much as you can in that time frame, and 30 days later have something that represents the concept that our clients already had, but it is something that will be complete enough to drive further testing and engagement. So we're very flexible there, but we do feel one way or another that innovation is an ongoing process. It is good to take an annualized approach to it and to establish and nurture and contribute to an ongoing program to be a constant and steady source of new ideas that can have impact across our client organizations. That's
great. Well, Will, thank you very much for walking us through that. Really appreciate the time that you spent with us today. And I'd like to thank everyone that joined the webinar for your time and attention during our hour together this afternoon. And remember, please join us on September 28th for the next webinar in our customer engagement series with guest speaker Tony Costa from Forrester Research. And the title of that series is "The Secret to a Better Customer Experience is Through Personalization." So we look forward to speaking with you again, and please remember, if you have any questions that you want to follow up with, reach us at engage@liquidhub.com. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great day.
Yeah, thank you.